You pride yourself on being intelligent, don't you? You read the books, you understand the concepts, you can hold conversations that make others nod in respect. But deep down, you know something is missing. You still react when someone pushes your buttons. You still feel that knot in your stomach when someone doesn't approve of you. You still find yourself explaining yourself to people who don't even matter. What if I told you that everything you call intelligence is just the surface? What if real intelligence is so quiet, so invisible, that most people live their entire lives without even knowing it exists? I am Solomon, and I discovered something that transformed me from a young prince into the most powerful man who ever walked this earth. Not through armies or gold, but through a form of intelligence so profound that it made me untouchable. While others fought with swords, I learned to read souls. While others shouted to be heard, I mastered the language of silence. This is not about becoming smarter. This is about becoming someone completely different. Someone who can walk into any room and immediately understand every person's deepest fears and desires. Someone who never needs to raise their voice because their presence alone commands respect. Someone who moves through life like a master chess player while everyone else is still learning the rules. Most people will never access this level of awareness because it requires something they're not willing to give up. Their need to be liked. Their need to be right. Their need to react immediately to everything that disturbs their peace. But you're different. You're here because something inside you recognizes that there's a deeper game being played, and you're tired of being a pawn in it. In the next few minutes, I will share with you the exact principles that allowed me to see through every deception, predict every move, and remain completely calm while others crumbled under pressure. This isn't theory. This is the blueprint for becoming dangerously intelligent. If you're ready to step into this invisible power, if you're ready to become the person who understands what others cannot even see, then subscribe right now. Because what I'm about to reveal will separate you forever from the masses who mistake noise for strength and reaction for intelligence. Number 1, the origin of dark intelligence. You spend your days speaking, explaining, justifying your thoughts to anyone who will listen. You believe that words are your power, that volume equals authority, that the one who speaks loudest wins the argument. But I am here to tell you something that will shatter this illusion completely. The greatest strength I ever possessed was not in my voice, but in my silence. Not in what I said, but in what I chose never to reveal. In my youth, I made the same mistake you make now. I thought intelligence was about having the right answers, about impressing others with my knowledge, about proving I was worthy of their respect. I would enter discussions eager to show what I knew, desperate to be acknowledged as wise. But wisdom, true wisdom, came to me only when I learned to close my mouth and open my eyes. The turning point came during a council meeting when I was still young. The elders were debating a matter of trade disputes, each one raising their voice higher than the last, each one more convinced of their own brilliance. I sat in silence, not because I had nothing to say, but because something deeper was calling my attention. I began to watch their faces, their gestures, the rhythm of their breathing, and in that silence I discovered something extraordinary. The man shouting loudest about justice was the same man whose hands trembled when he spoke of the merchants involved. His voice grew stronger when he mentioned punishment, but his eyes darted away when asked for specifics. He was not seeking justice. He was seeking to hide his own dealings with those very merchants. The woman who spoke most passionately about protecting our people kept glancing toward a younger man in the corner, and when she spoke of sacrifice, her voice carried not conviction but guilt. She had already made her choice, and it was not the people she was protecting. In that single moment of observation, I learned more about human nature than years of studying scrolls had taught me. Silence had become my teacher, and the hearts of men had become my classroom. This is the birth of what I call dark intelligence. Not evil, not malicious, but hidden. like the roots of a tree that grow deep beneath the surface, invisible but feeding everything above. Most people live their entire lives on the surface, reacting to words, believing in performances, taking everything at face value. But I learned to see the undercurrents, the hidden motivations, the secret fears that drive every human action. Silence exposes the heart of men because in silence, they must fill the void. When you stop talking, when you stop trying to impress, when you stop rushing to fill every pause with your own voice, something magical happens. Others begin to reveal themselves. They cannot bear the silence, so they fill it with their truths, their fears, their desperate need for validation. I watched kingdoms rise and fall, not because of armies or gold, but because of the silent intelligence that operated beneath the surface. The king who could not bear a moment of quiet in his throne room was the king who made decisions based on the last voice he heard. The advisor who spoke the most in council was usually the advisor with the most to hide. The merchant who promised the most was invariably the merchant planning to deliver the least. While other men sought to be heard, I sought to understand. Understanding became my weapon, my shield, my crown. I learned to read the language that exists beneath words, the forced laughter that reveals insecurity, the eyes that look everywhere except at you when telling what should be truth, the voice that rises in pitch when the speaker knows their words ring hollow, the hands that gesture too much when the story being told is rehearsed rather than lived. This intelligence is not taught in schools because it cannot be written in books. It lives in the space between heartbeats, in the pause before an answer, in the silence that follows a question no one wants to answer. It is the wisdom of the observer, not the performer, the wisdom of the one who sees patterns while others see only chaos. I discovered that every human interaction is a negotiation, every conversation a chess game, every silence a move more powerful than words. When someone spoke to me with excessive enthusiasm, I heard desperation. When someone avoided my gaze while praising me, I saw deception. When someone asked too many questions about my plans, I recognized the spy. Centuries later, a man named Niccolo Machiavelli would write about the same truths I had discovered. He would speak of the fox and the lion, of the power that operates invisibly, of the prince who wins not through strength alone, but through understanding. But I had lived these truths long before they were ever written down. I had learned that real power is like water, finding every crack, filling every space, yet remaining fluid enough to change direction when necessary. The observer perceives patterns because the observer is not caught up in the performance. When you are not trying to win the conversation, you can see who is trying too hard to lose it. When you are not seeking approval, you can see who is desperate to give it. When you are not afraid of silence, you can hear what is really being said in the spaces between words. This is dark intelligence. Not the darkness of evil, but the darkness of depth, of hiddenness, of power that operates below the surface where most people never think to look. It is the intelligence that sees betrayal before it happens, recognizes lies before they are fully formed, and understands motivations before they are acted upon. The mind that has learned this discipline does not react anymore. It records, it calculates, it waits. Because in the waiting, in the silence, in the observation, lies the power to move without being moved, to influence without being influenced, to see without being seen. Number 2, the metamorphosis, from naive to strategic. There was a time when I believed in the power of truth. I thought that if I simply spoke honestly, if I laid bare my intentions, if I showed my genuine heart to the world, then justice would prevail and goodness would triumph. I was young, and like all young men, I confused idealism with wisdom. I thought the world was a place where the best argument wins, where sincerity is rewarded, where truth speaks for itself. How devastatingly wrong I was. The first crack in this beautiful delusion came when I witnessed my own father's advisors in action. These were men who spoke of loyalty while planning betrayal, who praised his wisdom to his face while mocking his decisions in private, who offered solutions designed not to solve problems but to create dependence. I watched my father, a good man with a noble heart, make decision after decision based on what these men told him was true. And I realized that my father was not governing his kingdom. He was being governed by the stories others chose to tell him. The naive man believes that truth is what matters, but the wise man learns that what matters is what people believe to be truth. And beliefs, I discovered, are not formed by facts. They are crafted by those who understand the architecture of the human mind. This realization changed everything. I began to understand that every interaction was not a search for truth, but a battle for influence. Every conversation was not an exchange of ideas, but a contest to see whose version of reality would prevail. Every relationship was not a meeting of equals, but a complex dance of power, perception, and control. I remember the exact moment my metamorphosis began. There was a dispute between two merchants, both claiming the other had cheated them. They came before me expecting justice, expecting me to discover who was telling the truth. But as I listened to their stories, I realized that truth was irrelevant. What mattered was which story I chose to believe, and more importantly, which story I chose to make others believe. The first merchant told his tale with passion, with righteousness, with the fire of a man wronged. But I noticed that his story was too perfect, too rehearsed, with an answer for every possible question. The second merchant stumbled through his words, contradicted himself, seemed uncertain of details. The naive Solomon would have trusted the passionate one and dismissed the confused one. But I had begun to learn a different language. The passionate merchant's perfection revealed preparation. His righteousness felt performed. His answers came too quickly, as if he had anticipated every question because he had asked them of himself while crafting his deception. The confused merchant's uncertainty revealed something else entirely. Truth is messy. Memory is imperfect. When someone tells you exactly what happened without hesitation, they are usually telling you what they prepared to say, not what they remember happening. I ruled in favor of the confused merchant, and later discovered I had been right. But the victory was hollow because I realized how easily I could have been wrong. I realized that I had not discovered truth. I had made a calculated guess based on reading beneath the surface of their performances. And if I could be fooled, then everyone could be fooled. And if everyone could be fooled, then the one who understood this held immense power. This was my metamorphosis from naive to strategic. I stopped seeking truth and started understanding belief. I stopped trying to be right and started learning to appear right. I stopped thinking that good intentions would protect me and started recognizing that the world belongs to those who control perception. Control of illusions became my greatest skill. I learned that he who guides what people believe also guides how they behave. Show a man that his enemy is weak, and he becomes bold. Show him that his enemy is strong, and he becomes cautious. Show him that his enemy is unpredictable, and he becomes paralyzed. The enemy does not change, but the man's behavior changes completely based on what he has been led to believe. I began to study not what people said, but what they needed to hear. Not what they thought, but what they needed to think. Not who they were, but who they needed to become for my purposes. This was not manipulation in the crude sense. It was architecture. I was building structures of belief that would serve larger purposes. My words ceased to be ornaments and became instruments. Before my metamorphosis, I spoke to express myself, to be understood, to connect. After my metamorphosis, I spoke to achieve outcomes. Every sentence was released like medicine, designed to produce a specific effect in the mind of the listener. Not poison, as the naive might think, but medicine. Sometimes bitter medicine that would cure a deeper sickness. When a general came to me full of pride about a recent victory, I did not praise him as he expected. Instead, I spoke quietly about the unpredictability of fortune, about how victory can make a man careless, about how enemies study our tactics when we win. I watched his pride transform into thoughtfulness, his carelessness into caution. He left my presence not deflated but wiser, and more importantly, less likely to make the mistakes that proud generals make. When a young noble came to me seeking my blessing for a reckless venture, I did not forbid him directly. Instead, I told him stories of other young men who had attempted similar ventures. I spoke of their courage, their noble intentions, their terrible ends. I made him see himself in their stories. He left convinced that abandoning his plan was his own wise decision, not my command. This is how words become weapons, not through shouting or commanding, but through shaping the landscape of thought itself. The naive Solomon would have argued with the general's pride and forbidden the young noble's plan. The strategic Solomon learned to make them convince themselves. The change was not sudden but gradual, like the slow turn of seasons. I stopped seeking approval and began shaping the game itself. I stopped reacting to what others said and started anticipating what they would say. I stopped trying to defend my position and started positioning myself beyond attack. Pain ceased to be weakness and became data. When someone betrayed me, I no longer felt only hurt. I felt curiosity. What had motivated them? What did they hope to gain? What fear or desire had I failed to account for? Every betrayal became a lesson in human nature. Every disappointment a tutorial in the gap between appearance and reality. This metamorphosis is not comfortable. There are moments when you will mourn the innocent person you used to be. There are nights when you will question whether understanding the world as it truly is was worth losing the ability to see it as you wish it were. But there is no return from this knowledge. Once you see the strings that move the puppets, you cannot unsee them. Once you understand that most of what people call reality is simply agreed-upon illusion, you cannot go back to living inside those illusions. The naive man is at the mercy of every wind that blows. The strategic man learns to read the wind and adjust his sails accordingly. The naive man believes the world should be fair. The strategic man understands that fairness is something you create, not something you wait for. Number 3, the 5 traits of the dangerously intelligent. You have felt it, have you not? That burning in your chest when someone insults you, that immediate need to defend yourself, to prove them wrong, to make them understand your worth. You have felt your voice rise, your pulse quicken, your mind race to find the perfect response that will destroy their argument and restore your dignity. In those moments, you believe you are being strong. But I am here to tell you that in those moments, you are revealing your greatest weakness. The first trait of the dangerously intelligent is unshakable calm. Not the false calm of someone pretending to be unaffected, but the genuine stillness that comes from understanding something most people never learn. Insults are information. Pressure is data. Attacks are revelations about the attacker, not verdicts about the attacked. When someone insulted me, something extraordinary would happen in my mind. Instead of feeling wounded, I would feel curious. What fear drove them to attack? What insecurity made them believe that diminishing me would elevate them? What weakness were they trying to hide behind their aggression? The insult would bounce off me like rain off stone, but the information it carried about their inner world would be absorbed completely. I learned to transform every emotional trigger into strategic advantage. My anger became analysis. Instead of wanting to hurt them back, I wanted to understand what made them so desperate to hurt me. My sadness became strategy. Instead of wallowing in disappointment, I studied what I had misread about their character. My fear became foresight. Instead of being paralyzed by what might happen, I planned for every possibility I could imagine. This is not about suppressing emotion. This is about alchemy. This is about taking the raw metal of human feeling and forging it into something infinitely more valuable. The common man is ruled by his emotions. The dangerously intelligent man rules his emotions. He takes their energy and transforms it into clarity, precision, power. The second trait is deep reading. While others listen to words, I learn to read the symphony beneath words. Every human being is constantly broadcasting information about their inner state, but most people are too busy broadcasting their own signal to receive anyone else's. I developed what I call peripheral vision of the soul. I could sit in a council meeting and, without appearing to pay special attention to anyone, map the entire emotional landscape of the room. I could see betrayal before it was born in the way someone's breathing changed when my name was mentioned. I could detect lies in the micro-expressions that flashed across faces for less than a second before being replaced by composed masks. Trembling hands told me about insecurity, even when the voice was strong. Rigid eyes revealed deception, even when the words were smooth. Excessive pauses exposed guilt, even when the story was carefully constructed. I learned that the body cannot lie as skillfully as the mouth. The nervous system betrays what the conscious mind tries to hide. But this reading went deeper than physical tells. I learned to see patterns in behavior, to recognize the hidden currents that drive human action. The advisor who always agreed with me was usually planning to betray me. The ally who constantly reassured me of their loyalty was usually the one shopping around for a better offer. The enemy who seemed most dangerous was often less threat than the friend who seemed most reliable. The third trait is mystery and rarity. I made a decision that changed everything about how I was perceived and how I operated in the world. I decided to become rare, not physically absent but strategically scarce. Not hiding, but becoming selective about where I placed my presence and attention. Most people believe that power comes from being everywhere, knowing everyone, being involved in every decision. But I learned that power comes from absence as much as presence. When I stopped attending every gathering, my presence at any gathering became significant. When I stopped responding to every request for my time, access to my time became valuable. When I stopped sharing my thoughts on every matter, my opinion on any matter became weighty. Rarity is power because human beings always value what is difficult to obtain. When you make yourself available to everyone, you make yourself valuable to no one. When you speak about everything, your words lose their impact. When you react to every provocation, your reactions become predictable and therefore manageable. I became like the mountain peak, visible from a distance, impressive in its presence but not easily reached. People would plan expeditions to gain my attention. They would prepare carefully for conversations with me. They would remember every word I spoke, because they knew they might not get another chance to hear my thoughts on that matter. Mystery became my weapon because human beings fear what they cannot understand and respect what they cannot fully grasp. I revealed only what served my purposes and kept everything else behind a veil of calculated ambiguity. This was not deception. This was depth. There were layers to my thinking that only those who proved themselves worthy were allowed to access. The fourth trait is surgical words. I learned that words are like medicine. The dosage matters, the timing matters, the method of delivery matters. Too little and there is no effect. Too much and there is poison. At the wrong time and there is waste. In the wrong way and there is damage. Each sentence I spoke was measured like a jeweler measures precious stones. Each pause was intentional, creating space for my words to sink deep into the listener's mind. I did not seek to persuade through argument, because argument creates resistance. I sought to make others persuade themselves, which creates conviction. When I wanted someone to reach a conclusion, I would not tell them the conclusion. I would ask questions that would lead their mind down a path where that conclusion would seem like their own discovery. When I wanted someone to change their behavior, I would not command the change. I would create conditions where the change would feel like their own choice. I learned that the most powerful words are often the simplest ones. Not impressive vocabulary designed to show intelligence, but precise language designed to create specific responses. I would say I wonder instead of I think, because wondering invites others to join me in exploration, while thinking invites them to debate my position. I would say, what if, instead of you should, because possibilities feel like gifts while commands feel like threats. The fifth trait is self-sufficiency. This was perhaps the most difficult lesson to master, but it became my greatest source of power. I learned to become completely independent of any need for approval, validation, or emotional comfort from others. This did not make me cold or disconnected. It made me free. When I ceased to need applause, I could make decisions based on wisdom rather than popularity. When I ceased to need approval, I could speak truth rather than what people wanted to hear. When I ceased to need emotional validation, I could see people clearly rather than through the filter of my own needs. The man who needs nothing is untouchable because there is nothing you can offer him and nothing you can threaten to take away. He cannot be bribed because he desires nothing you can give. He cannot be threatened because he fears nothing you can do. He cannot be manipulated because he needs nothing you can withhold. This self-sufficiency became like armor, but armor that did not weigh me down. It was the armor of inner completion. I had learned to fill my own emotional needs, to validate my own worth, to provide my own sense of purpose and direction. Others could add to my life, but no one could subtract from my essential self. When someone tried to hurt me by withdrawing their approval, I felt nothing because their approval had never been the source of my confidence. When someone tried to control me by threatening to abandon me, I felt nothing because I had learned that the only companionship that matters is the one you have with yourself. These 5 traits work together like the fingers of a hand. Unshakable calm allows you to read deeply. Deep reading reveals when mystery is needed. Mystery makes your words more powerful. Powerful words require less external validation. And self-sufficiency enables all the others. Together, they create something that most people will never experience. A kind of inner sovereignty that makes you dangerous not because you seek to harm others, but because you cannot be harmed by them. You become like water that cannot be grasped, like wind that cannot be caught, like silence that cannot be argued with. This is not about becoming cold or cruel. This is about becoming complete. This is about reaching a level of inner development where you operate from strength rather than need, from choice rather than compulsion, from wisdom rather than reaction. This is about becoming someone who shapes the game instead of being shaped by it. Number 4, practical techniques of dark intelligence. Let me teach you something that will change every conversation you have for the rest of your life. Most people think conversation is about exchanging information. They believe that when 2 people talk, they are simply sharing thoughts, opinions, and experiences. But I learned something far more profound. Every conversation is a negotiation. Every exchange of words is a contest of wills. Every dialogue is an opportunity to map the terrain of another person's mind and, if necessary, to reshape that terrain. The first technique I mastered was control without domination. This is perhaps the most sophisticated skill in human interaction. The crude approach to influence is obvious. You tell people what to do. You argue until they submit. You use authority or threats to force compliance. But this approach creates resistance, resentment, and eventually rebellion. The subtle approach is far more powerful and far more permanent. I learned to guide conversations with innocent questions that drew out hidden truths. Instead of making statements that could be argued with, I asked questions that made people reveal their own thoughts. Instead of pushing my agenda directly, I created conditions where my agenda would seem like the natural conclusion of their own reasoning. When I wanted to know if an advisor was loyal, I would not ask directly. Instead, I would mention another advisor's name and watch their reaction. I would ask hypothetical questions about loyalty and betrayal, framing them as philosophical discussions. I would create scenarios where they would have to choose between their interest and mine, but make it seem like a casual conversation about ethics. Within minutes, I would have a complete map of their true allegiances, and they would never know they had been tested. When I wanted to influence someone's decision, I would not argue for my preferred outcome. Instead, I would ask them to explain their reasoning to me. I would listen carefully to their arguments and then ask questions that exposed the weaknesses in their logic. Not aggressively, not confrontationally, but with genuine curiosity. I would say things like, "Help me understand how you arrived at that conclusion," or "What do you think would happen if we considered this from another angle?" People cannot resist the invitation to teach someone who seems genuinely interested in learning from them. And in teaching me their reasoning, they would often discover the flaws in their own thinking. The conclusion I wanted them to reach would emerge as their own insight, not my imposition. The second technique was the strategic use of silence. Most people fear silence the way they fear darkness. They rush to fill every pause with words, every gap with noise. But I learned that silence is one of the most powerful weapons in human interaction. Not aggressive silence designed to punish, but patient silence designed to reveal. When someone tried to manipulate me, I would remain quiet. Not because I did not understand their manipulation, but because I wanted to see how far they would take it. In the discomfort of silence, people reveal their true intentions. They elaborate beyond what they plan to say. They add details they meant to keep hidden. They shift from confident manipulation to desperate persuasion. I remember a merchant who came to me with what he thought was a clever scheme. He wanted to sell me goods at an inflated price by convincing me they were rare and valuable. His initial pitch was smooth and rehearsed. But when I simply listened without responding, he began to worry that I was not convinced. So he added more details about the rarity. Then he offered a small discount to show goodwill. Then he mentioned other wealthy buyers who were interested, hoping to create urgency. By the time he finished talking, I knew exactly what the goods were actually worth, who his other clients really were, and how desperate he was to make this sale. His silence-induced nervousness had given me all the information I needed to negotiate from a position of complete advantage. And he had given it to me willingly, thinking he was being more persuasive. Silence also works as a form of pressure that leaves no fingerprints. When someone has disappointed me or violated a boundary, I do not need to argue or punish directly. I simply withdraw my normal level of engagement. I become polite but distant, present but unavailable. The absence of my usual warmth creates more anxiety than any criticism could. The third technique I call mirror and redirect. This is based on understanding that human beings are energy systems, and energy can be reflected and redirected rather than absorbed or opposed. When someone came to me with anger, I would not meet their anger with more anger. Instead, I would reflect their emotional energy and redirect it toward a target that served my purposes. If a general came to me furious about a rival's actions, I would not try to calm him down. Instead, I would help him articulate exactly why he was angry, what the rival had done wrong, and what the consequences might be. I would amplify his anger while subtly directing it away from rash, immediate action toward strategic long-term planning. His emotional energy would remain high, but it would be channeled into useful analysis rather than destructive reaction. If someone approached me with excessive pride, thinking they could use their accomplishments to gain leverage over me, I would not attack their pride directly. Instead, I would feed it. I would ask them to tell me more about their success. I would marvel at their cleverness. I would ask for their advice on similar matters. And in the intoxication of being praised and consulted, they would reveal far more about their methods, resources, and plans than they ever intended to share. Pride makes people stupid, but attacking pride makes them defensive. Feeding pride makes them talkative, and talkative people give away secrets. The fourth technique was reveal only after victory. I learned never to announce my plans beforehand, never to warn my opponents of my strategies, never to reveal my hand until the game was already won. This principle served me in every area of life, from personal relationships to political maneuvering to business negotiations. Most people cannot resist the temptation to be clever in advance. They hint at their plans, seeking admiration for their intelligence. They warn their enemies, thinking it makes them appear more formidable. They explain their strategies, hoping to persuade others to support them. But advance revelation is advance defeat. When I decided to remove a corrupt official from his position, I did not confront him with evidence of his corruption. I did not threaten him with consequences. I did not give him an opportunity to defend himself, make excuses, or cover his tracks. Instead, I quietly gathered irrefutable proof, arranged for alternative leadership, prepared explanations for the public, and coordinated the timing with other necessary changes. Only when everything was in place, when his removal was already accomplished, did I reveal what he had done and why he was gone. The power of this approach is psychological as much as practical. When people realize they have been outmaneuvered without ever knowing they were in a contest, it creates a profound sense of unease. They begin to wonder what else I might have planned, what other moves I might have already made, what other outcomes I might have already secured. This uncertainty makes them far more careful in their future dealings with me. The fifth technique was strategic coldness. This is perhaps the most misunderstood aspect of dark intelligence. It is not cruelty for the sake of cruelty, not coldness for the sake of coldness. It is the discipline of emotional detachment in service of larger purposes. I never punished by impulse because impulse creates patterns that can be predicted and countered. When someone betrayed me or caused harm, I did not react immediately with anger or revenge. Instead, I would note the transgression, analyze its implications, and plan an appropriate response for the optimal time and circumstances. This strategic delay served multiple purposes. First, it prevented me from making emotional decisions that I might later regret. Second, it allowed me to choose consequences that would be educational rather than merely punitive. Third, it created uncertainty in the minds of those who wronged me, because they never knew when or how I might respond. When I did act, the response was clean and final. There was no drama, no public spectacle, no emotional satisfaction sought or gained. The consequence was simply implemented like a natural law. The person who had violated trust would find themselves naturally excluded from situations requiring trust. The person who had spread lies would discover that their word no longer carried weight in important matters. The person who had acted against my interests would find opportunities redirected away from them toward others. These techniques work together to create something more powerful than any individual manipulation. They create an aura of competence and control that makes others naturally cautious about attempting to deceive or oppose you. People sense that you see more than you reveal, know more than you say, and plan more than you announce. This reputation for hidden depth becomes its own form of protection and power. But remember, the goal of these techniques is not to harm others or to manipulate for selfish gain. The goal is to see clearly, to influence wisely, and to shape outcomes in service of larger purposes. Dark intelligence is dark not because it is evil, but because it operates in the shadows of human consciousness, in the spaces between what people say and what they mean, between what they show and what they hide. Number 5. Relationships as structures of power. You think you know what love is. You think you understand friendship. You believe that relationships are about connection, companionship, mutual support, and shared joy. And in your naivety, you enter every relationship as if it were a sanctuary, a safe space where you can lower your guard and reveal your true self. But I must shatter this beautiful illusion, because it is this very innocence that makes you vulnerable to those who understand what relationships really are. Every relationship is a structure of power. Every conversation is a negotiation. Every act of kindness is an investment expecting return. Every moment of vulnerability is either a gift or a weapon, depending on who receives it. This does not make relationships evil or meaningless. It makes them complex, strategic, and requiring wisdom to navigate safely. The first truth I learned was that conversations are negotiations, even when they appear to be simple exchanges. When someone compliments you, they may be genuinely expressing admiration, but they may also be attempting to create a debt of reciprocity. When someone confides in you, they may be seeking emotional support, but they may also be testing your trustworthiness or creating a sense of intimate connection that can be leveraged later. I learned to listen not just to what people said, but to what they were trying to accomplish by saying it. Every compliment could be a bribe, designed to make me feel obligated to return favor or support. Every criticism could be a test, designed to see how I would react under pressure. Every question could be reconnaissance, designed to map my thoughts, plans, or weaknesses. This awareness did not make me paranoid or suspicious of every human interaction. Instead, it made me precise. I learned to recognize genuine connection when it occurred, and I learned to protect myself when it did not. I learned to give appropriate responses to different types of communication, rather than responding to everything as if it were sincere and innocent. When someone praised me excessively, I would thank them politely but note their agenda. When someone criticized me harshly, I would listen for useful information while ignoring the emotional manipulation. When someone asked probing questions about my plans, I would satisfy their curiosity with information that revealed nothing important while appearing to be open and trusting. The error of the common person is revealing too much too soon. In their hunger for acceptance and connection, people spill their histories, expose their fears, confess their dreams, and display their vulnerabilities to anyone who shows interest. They believe that this openness will create intimacy and trust, but what it actually creates is a detailed map that others can use to manipulate them. I learned to do the opposite. I would guard my past and absorb theirs. I would listen carefully to their stories, their fears, their dreams, their confessions, while revealing very little of my own inner world. Not because I was deceptive, but because I understood that information is currency in relationships, and the person who spends all their currency first has no leverage left. When someone told me about their difficult childhood, I would listen with empathy and ask thoughtful questions, but I would not respond by sharing my own difficult experiences. When someone confessed a fear, I would validate their courage in sharing it, but I would not balance the vulnerability by confessing a fear of my own. When someone told me about their dreams and ambitions, I would show interest and support, but I would not reciprocate by revealing my own plans and goals. This created an imbalance of information that worked in my favor. I knew their pressure points, their motivations, their weaknesses, and their desires. They knew only what I chose to reveal when I chose to reveal it, in the dosage that served my purposes. The power of absence became one of my most effective tools. Most people try to resolve conflicts through confrontation. They argue, they explain, they defend, they attack. But confrontation gives the other person something to push against, something to debate, something to feel victimized by. Absence gives them nothing but their own thoughts and the consequences of their actions. When someone treated me with disrespect, I did not confront them about it. I simply became less available to them. Not dramatically, not with announcement or explanation, but gradually and naturally. I would be busy when they wanted my attention. I would be brief when they wanted extended conversation. I would be polite but distant when they wanted warmth and engagement. The void created by my withdrawal spoke louder than any words could. They would begin to notice the change and wonder what they had done wrong. They would replay our recent interactions, searching for the cause of my coolness. They would often realize their mistake without me ever having to explain it, and they would work to repair the damage without me ever having to ask. This technique is devastating to manipulators because manipulation depends on reaction. The manipulator throws out bait and waits for you to take it. They create drama and expect you to participate. They attack and expect you to defend. But when you simply absent yourself from the entire dynamic, their manipulation has nothing to work on. I remember a court noble who thought he could pressure me into supporting his position by publicly questioning my wisdom in front of others. He expected me to defend myself, to argue with him, to engage in a battle of words that would either elevate his status or give him ammunition to use against me later. Instead, I listened to his challenge with mild interest, acknowledged his perspective with a non-committal response, and then shifted the conversation to other matters. But from that day forward, he found himself gradually excluded from important discussions. Not obviously, not dramatically, but systematically. He was not invited to crucial meetings. His opinions were not sought on significant decisions. His presence was not requested at key gatherings. Within months, he had been effectively marginalized, and everyone could see that his attack on me had backfired spectacularly. The lesson was clear to everyone. Challenging me openly was not dangerous because I would retaliate, but because I would simply stop including you in anything that mattered. Proximity to me became a privilege, not a right. I learned that being near me, having access to my thoughts, being included in my plans, receiving my attention and energy, was something valuable that could be granted or withdrawn based on how people conducted themselves. This was not cruelty. This was natural consequence. People who demonstrated wisdom, loyalty, and respect found themselves with greater access to my time and knowledge. People who demonstrated foolishness, betrayal, or disrespect found themselves with less access. The proximity itself became a reward system that shaped behavior without me ever having to issue commands or threats. I discovered that love and affection, when given strategically rather than automatically, become far more powerful. When my warmth and approval were constant regardless of how people treated me, they had no value. But when my warmth and approval were responsive to people's choices, they became treasures that people would work to earn and strive to keep. This does not mean being manipulative with affection or withholding love as punishment. It means understanding that unconditional positive regard, while beautiful in theory, often enables poor behavior and teaches people that they can treat you badly without consequence. Strategic affection teaches people that how they treat you affects how you treat them, which is simply the natural order of healthy relationships. Affection by choice became my shield against those who would exploit unconditional love. I learned to offer my care, attention, and emotional investment to those who valued it appropriately, while protecting myself from those who would take advantage of unlimited generosity. The person who understands relationships as structures of power is not cold or calculating in a cruel sense. They are simply aware of the dynamics that naive people ignore. They protect themselves appropriately while still being capable of genuine connection with those who prove themselves worthy of trust. They create boundaries that make relationships healthier for everyone involved. This wisdom transforms every interaction from a potential vulnerability into an opportunity for greater understanding and more effective influence. You begin to see patterns in human behavior that were invisible before. You begin to predict outcomes that would have surprised you previously. You begin to shape the dynamics of your relationships rather than being shaped by them. Number 6, the discipline of the invisible and the unpredictable. There is a moment in every person's life when they must choose between being understood and being powerful. Most people choose to be understood. They wear their hearts on their sleeves, share their thoughts freely, explain their motivations constantly, and live as open books for anyone to read. They believe that transparency creates trust and that being fully known leads to being fully loved. But I learned that the person who can be completely read can be completely controlled. I chose power. I chose mystery. I chose to become someone who could be felt but never fully understood, anticipated but never predicted, respected but never taken for granted. This choice changed everything about how I moved through the world and how the world responded to me. The discipline begins with masks and layers, not false faces worn to deceive, but strategic depths that reveal themselves only to those who prove worthy of deeper access. I learned to show only 60% of my mind in any interaction, keeping 40% hidden beneath the surface. This was not deception. This was wisdom. Most people exhaust themselves trying to be completely authentic in every moment, sharing every thought, expressing every feeling, revealing every motivation. But complete authenticity is complete vulnerability. When someone knows everything about how you think, they know exactly how to manipulate your thinking. When someone understands all your emotional patterns, they can predict and control your emotional responses. When someone has mapped your entire inner landscape, they can navigate it better than you can. I learned to reveal myself in layers, like an ancient temple with multiple chambers. The outer chamber was accessible to everyone. This contained my public positions, my general philosophies, my surface-level reactions to events. Most people thought they knew me based on this outer chamber, and I allowed them to maintain this illusion. The second chamber was accessible only to those who had proven themselves trustworthy over time. This contained more personal thoughts, deeper motivations, more complex reasoning behind my decisions. People who reached this level felt privileged to have my confidence, and they were right to feel privileged. But even they did not see everything. The inner chamber was accessible to almost no one. This contained my deepest strategies, my most private fears, my ultimate goals, my most vulnerable truths. Only those who had demonstrated absolute loyalty, perfect discretion, and complete alignment with my values ever glimpsed this level of my being. And even then, only partially. This layered approach to self-revelation served multiple purposes. First, it protected me from those who would use intimate knowledge as a weapon. Second, it created natural incentives for people to prove themselves worthy of deeper trust. Third, it ensured that different people had different levels of access, preventing any single person from gaining complete knowledge that could be used against me. But the true power of this discipline was that it made me unpredictable. When people cannot fully map your inner world, they cannot accurately predict your responses to changing circumstances. When they cannot predict your responses, they cannot manipulate you effectively. When they cannot manipulate you, they must deal with you honestly. I became like a ghost in the system, moving pieces without leaving marks, influencing outcomes without revealing the source of influence. This was not about being secretive for its own sake, but about understanding that visible power creates resistance while invisible power creates results. When I wanted to remove a corrupt official, I did not announce an investigation or make public accusations. Instead, I quietly gathered information, built consensus among other leaders, prepared alternative arrangements, and created conditions where the corrupt official's removal would seem like a natural consequence of circumstances rather than a deliberate action on my part. When I wanted to promote a policy, I did not argue for it in public forums where it could be opposed and debated. Instead, I planted seeds of the idea in private conversations with influential people, allowed them to develop and refine the concept, and then supported their initiative when they presented it as their own insight. This invisible influence was far more effective than direct action would have been. Direct action creates opponents who can organize resistance. Invisible influence creates outcomes that appear inevitable, natural, uncontestable. Rarity became my strategy for maximum impact. I learned that absence at the right moment creates more impact than constant presence. Most people try to maximize their influence by being everywhere, knowing everyone, participating in every decision, making their voice heard on every topic. But this approach dilutes influence rather than concentrating it. I chose to be selective about where I placed my attention, energy, and presence. When everyone expected me to attend a gathering, I would sometimes choose to be absent, making my absence itself a statement. When everyone expected me to comment on an issue, I would sometimes remain silent, making my silence more meaningful than words could have been. This strategic absence created several powerful effects. First, it made my actual presence more valuable and more noticed. When I did choose to attend an event or participate in a discussion, people paid closer attention to what I said and did. Second, it created space for me to observe from a distance, seeing patterns and dynamics that would have been invisible if I were actively participating. Third, it made people wonder about my thoughts and plans, creating an aura of mystery that enhanced my influence. I remember a crisis that erupted in the kingdom, with various factions demanding immediate action and different solutions. Everyone expected me to call an emergency council, to make dramatic pronouncements, to take visible leadership in resolving the crisis. Instead, I remained quietly in my private chambers, sending brief messages to key individuals, asking carefully chosen questions, gathering information while appearing to be uninvolved. My absence from the public drama allowed me to see the crisis clearly while others were caught up in emotional reactions. I could identify the real causes behind the apparent symptoms, distinguish between genuine problems and manufactured emergencies, and recognize which proposed solutions would actually work versus which ones would simply create new problems. When I finally did act, it was with surgical precision. The solution I implemented addressed the root causes rather than the surface symptoms, satisfied the legitimate concerns of all parties rather than favoring one faction, and prevented similar crises in the future rather than simply managing the immediate emergency. My delayed but decisive action was far more effective than immediate but emotional reactions would have been. This principle extends beyond crisis management to every area of influence. The leader who speaks on every topic has his words lose weight. The advisor who attends every meeting has his presence lose significance. The friend who is always available has his attention lose value. But the leader who speaks rarely but powerfully, the advisor who appears selectively but insightfully, the friend who is sometimes unavailable but consistently valuable creates a different dynamic entirely. Centuries later, Niccolo Machiavelli would write about the fox and the lion, about the prince who must be both cunning and strong. But he would also write about a third path that I had discovered long before him. The path of the one who controls perception itself. Most people think there are only two ways to influence others, through love or through fear. You can make people want to please you, or you can make people afraid to oppose you. But I discovered a third way. You can make people uncertain about what you might do, think, or know. This uncertainty creates a different kind of influence, more subtle but often more powerful than either love or fear. When people love you, they may still oppose you if their interests conflict with yours. When people fear you, they may still betray you if they think they can get away with it. But when people are uncertain about your capabilities, knowledge, or intentions, they become naturally cautious about testing you. They assume you know more than you reveal, plan more than you announce, and see more than you acknowledge. This uncertainty is not created through threats or demonstrations of power. It is created through strategic unpredictability, through measured mystery, through the discipline of revealing less than you know and knowing more than you reveal. The invisible and unpredictable person operates like water, taking the shape of whatever container they encounter while maintaining their essential nature. They adapt to circumstances without losing their core identity. They respond to challenges without revealing their full capabilities. They influence outcomes without leaving fingerprints that can be traced back to them. This discipline requires constant awareness and self-control. It means resisting the temptation to explain yourself when misunderstood, to defend yourself when attacked, to reveal yourself when admired. It means understanding that being mysterious is more powerful than being understood, that being unpredictable is more effective than being consistent, that being invisible is more influential than being seen. Number 7, the silent pact of true power. You have reached the final threshold. Everything I have shared with you until this moment has been preparation for what I must tell you now. The techniques, the strategies, the observations about human nature, all of these are simply tools. But tools without purpose are meaningless. Techniques without wisdom are dangerous. Power without responsibility is destruction. There comes a moment when every person who has learned to see beneath the surface of human behavior must make a choice. You can use this knowledge to manipulate others for selfish gain, or you can use it to serve something greater than yourself. You can become a predator who feeds on human weakness, or you can become a guardian who protects against human folly. You can use dark intelligence to create chaos, or you can use it to create order. I learned that true power is not what you can take from others, but what you can give to the world. Not what you can destroy, but what you can build. Not what you can manipulate, but what you can inspire. The presence that unsettles is not the presence of someone who wants to harm you. It is the presence of someone who sees you completely, accepts you fully, but will not enable your self-deception or participate in your self-destruction. It is the presence of someone who has mastered themselves so completely that their very existence challenges others to face their own unmastered aspects. When I walked into a room, conversations would pause not because people feared I would hurt them, but because they sensed I would see through whatever performances they were giving. Lies became more difficult to tell in my presence not because I would expose them, but because the atmosphere of truth around me made deception feel suddenly empty and pointless. This is the paradox of true power. The more powerful you become internally, the less you need to demonstrate power externally. The more you master yourself, the less you need to control others. The more complete you become, the less you need to take from anyone else to feel whole. I learned that power is not throne, not gold, not the ability to command armies or control resources. True power is the ability to remain yourself regardless of external circumstances. True power is never needing to prove your worth to anyone because your worth is established in your own understanding. True power is being able to love without attachment, to care without neediness, to help without expecting return. The world is filled with people who mistake dominance for power, control for strength, manipulation for intelligence. They accumulate wealth they cannot enjoy, wield authority that brings them no peace, command respect they do not deserve. They are powerful in appearance but weak in essence, strong in position but fragile in spirit. True power is invisible because it operates through attraction rather than force, through inspiration rather than intimidation, through example rather than explanation. People follow true power not because they have to, but because they want to. They trust true power not because they are afraid not to, but because they sense its fundamental benevolence. The inner revolution that dark intelligence creates is not about becoming cold or cruel. It is about becoming precise. It is about refining yourself until your presence alone becomes a force for clarity, truth, and elevation in the world. Every word you speak carries weight because it comes from depth. Every action you take has impact because it comes from intention. Every silence you maintain creates space because it comes from wisdom. This precision is not perfection. It is alignment between your inner understanding and your outer expression. It is the harmony that comes when your thoughts, feelings, words, and actions all serve the same higher purpose. It is the integrity that makes manipulation impossible, because There are no contradictions in your being for others to exploit. When you reach this level of inner development, people sense something different about you that they cannot name. They feel safer in your presence because they know you will not deceive them, even if the truth is difficult. They feel challenged by your presence because your clarity exposes their confusion. They feel inspired by your presence because your possibility demonstrates their potential. But this transformation comes with a price. You must be willing to let go of the comfortable illusions that most people cling to. You must be willing to see the world as it actually is rather than as you wish it were. You must be willing to take responsibility for your own emotional state, rather than expecting others to manage it for you. The pact of clarity is this: I see the shadows and I do not fear. This is not about becoming comfortable with evil or accepting wrongdoing. This is about becoming comfortable with complexity, with ambiguity, with the reality that human nature contains both light and darkness, both noble impulses and selfish desires, both wisdom and foolishness. When you can see the shadows without fear, you can navigate them with wisdom. When you can acknowledge darkness without being consumed by it, you can help others find their way to light. When you can understand weakness without judging it, you can help others discover their strength. This is the mark of one who has ceased to seek approval and chosen clarity instead. Approval is external, temporary, conditional on maintaining illusions. Clarity is internal, permanent, based on seeing reality accurately. Approval makes you dependent on others' perceptions. Clarity makes you free to act according to wisdom rather than expectation. The heritage of this wisdom extends across centuries. Long after my time, other seekers would rediscover the same truths I learned. Niccolo Machiavelli would write about the prince who must understand both virtue and necessity. Sun Tzu would write about victory without battle, about winning through superior positioning rather than superior force. Marcus Aurelius would write about the fortress of the mind, about inner strength that external circumstances cannot touch. But all of these writers were confirming what I had already lived. Power is not in spectacle but in silence, not in being loved or feared, but in being understood as someone who operates from a level of consciousness that transcends the ordinary patterns of human behavior. This is not about becoming superior to others. This is about becoming superior to your former self. This is about developing your consciousness to a level where you can see the games being played, understand the forces at work, and choose to respond from wisdom rather than reaction. The world needs people who have developed this level of awareness, who can see clearly without becoming cynical, who can understand manipulation without becoming manipulative, who can recognize power dynamics without becoming power-hungry. The world needs people who have mastered themselves enough to serve something greater than their own immediate desires. This is the silent pact of true power: to use your knowledge to protect rather than exploit, to elevate rather than diminish, to clarify rather than confuse, to become someone whose very existence makes the world a little more honest, a little more conscious, a little more aligned with wisdom rather than folly. When you make this pact, when you commit to using dark intelligence in service of light rather than darkness, you join an invisible fellowship that has existed throughout history. You become part of a lineage of consciousness that transcends time, culture, and circumstance. You become someone who understands not just how to see through the illusions, but why that sight is worth having. The journey from naive to strategic to wise is the journey from being shaped by the world to shaping yourself to serving the world. It is the path from victimhood to mastery to service. It is the evolution from seeking power over others to finding power within yourself, to using that power for purposes greater than yourself. This is what it means to be dangerously intelligent. Dangerous not to others, but to ignorance, to deception, to the forces that keep humanity trapped in cycles of unconsciousness and suffering. Dangerous to everything that prevents people from reaching their highest potential and living their most authentic lives. The ancient temple stones still whisper the same truth today. In the corridors where I once walked, in the silence where I once listened, the same patterns of human nature continue to unfold. The faces change, the names shift, the kingdoms rise and fall, but the heart of man remains the same labyrinth of desire, fear, and hidden intention. You now carry this sight within you. You have been given eyes that see beyond the veil, ears that hear the unspoken, a mind that calculates while others merely react. This is not a burden you can set down when convenient, nor a skill you can forget when it becomes uncomfortable. Once you have tasted the clarity that comes from understanding the true nature of power, there is no returning to the innocent sleep of those who mistake noise for strength. Every conversation you enter from this moment forward will be different. Every relationship you navigate will reveal layers previously invisible to you. Every challenge you face will find you standing not as the person you once were, but as someone who has learned to move like water through the cracks of human consciousness. The crown I spoke of is not something you wear, but something you become. It is not placed upon your head by others, but forged in the furnace of your own understanding. Each time you choose silence over reaction, observation over participation, strategy over impulse, you are adding another element to this invisible crown of mastery. If you sense that something fundamental has shifted in how you see the world, if you feel called to walk this path of deeper understanding, then join those who seek wisdom beyond the surface of things. Subscribe not as an ending, but as a recognition that this journey into the depths of human nature has only just begun. The wise know that true learning never concludes. It only deepens, like roots reaching toward hidden waters, like silence expanding into spaces where words fear to venture.